Tensura. Of Bonds and Demon Lords by Ryagful Chapter 1. Birth of a Nation and Demon Lord Tea Party. In a certain world inhabited by various magical races, there were two important meetings taking place that would change the fate of the world forever. One of these meetings was taking place in the territory of the Lizardmen near Lake Shisu. And in that meetings, the Jura Forest Alliance was born, and the slime known as Rimuru Tempest had just been declared its chancellor by its members. Now Rimuru saw sitting there in his slime form wondering, how the heck did this happen? In a slight panic that he would never let anyone about, thank God slimes have no expressions, he though, and recalled the events that led him to this place. It all started a few months earlier, in another world. There, he was just some guy in Japan named Satoru Mikami. No one important, really. Kinda a loser in his personal opinion, what with being single and a virgin his entire life. Even so, he was relatively content and easygoing, until one day he was murdered by some thief in broad daylight while protecting his junior. But death, as it turned out, was not the end, and shortly after dying he was reincarnated in another world, this one as a slime of all things. Furthermore, he had acquired some unique powers or skills as they were known for his trouble. These were Predator and Great Sage. Great Sage in particular was an incredible source of information and allowed him to quickly adapt and use his newfound powers to the fullest. Shortly after reincarnating, or a really long time, it was hard to tell when you had no eyes or sense organs, he met with the main inhabitant of the cave he was reborn in. The storm dragon Veldora, one of the mightiest beings in this world, who just happened to be imprisoned there. Long story short, the two become fast friends. And eventually the dragon gave him a new name, a monster name. Rimuru Tempest. The newly named Rimuru then swallowed Veldora whole, magic prison and all, with Predator. Inside his stomach dimension, he would be able to analyze the infinite prison with Great Sage and eventually free him, but that was a long way from completing. So he moved on, eventually escaping the cave and absorbing the powers of various monsters he consumed along the way and emerging in a great forest. Things proceeded quickly after that. Turns out, he had become quite powerful in his short time in the cave, and was quickly approached by a nearby village of lowly goblins for help. Never one to turn down pathetic pleas of help, he agreed, and dispatched the direwolves that were harassing the goblins, becoming the master of both. He went on a journey to the dwarven kingdom bordering the forest in the hope of acquiring some expertise in building and stuff, only to nearly find himself thrown into prison thanks to some sketchy bureaucrat. Thank God for level-headed kings, King Gazel Dwargo in this case, who only banished him and his new dwarf friends. They barely got to building up the former goblin now hobgoblin village before a meeting with a group of adventurers quickly went south when one of them, a woman named Shizu Izawa, an otherworlder like him, lost control of the fire spirit she was bound to. Though Rimuru managed to subdue the fire spirit, Shizu lost her life, but not before requesting Rimuru to consume her and take up her burdens, which he agreed to. In the process he acquired a human form, though a fairly small and girly one. He couldn't complain though, as he finally had a sense of taste and better combat coordination. Which he decidedly needed, as not long after a group of ogres accosted the goblin patrols and himself, though a quick display of his power quickly diffused the situation. The ogres were apparently the sole survivors of an ogre tribe which had been wiped out by an army of orcs, and since they had no place to go they became Rimuru's newest subordinates. Then the dryads, the guardians of the forest, came by and informed them that a massive horde of orcs under the control of a mythical orc lord was moving through the forests, and their leader Trainee personally requested Rimuru to lead the efforts in defeating them. In that regard, they attempted an alliance with the lizardmen of Lake Shisu. But unfortunately things didn't go too well, in no small part due to Gabiru, the idiot son of the lizardmen chief, who nearly got all his people killed. Fortunately for the lizardmen in the forests, Rimuru and his ogre subordinates proved more than enough to stop the advancing orcs dead in their track, and Rimuru personally took the orc lord Geld in combat, devouring him and allowing him to rest in peace, freeing the other orcs from his spell. And in the aftermath, this conference was hastily assembled to decide what to do with the rest of the orcs. As it turned out, they were quite literally starving as a devastating famine swept through their former land. Geld, their king, was desperate enough to accept the offer of a Majin named Gelmid to save his people, becoming the orc lord. Despite the damage done by the rampaging orcs, the other races decided to assist them nonetheless, in large part due to Rimuru. In the process, and under the lead of Trainee, the goblins, orcs, lizardmen and dryads united under the banner of Rimuru. And now they were all bowing to him. Chancellor? Me? He shouted internally, hang on. Why isn't Trainee the Chancellor? And why is she bowing to me too now? Ah crap, too late to back down now. Well, I guess that's that then. Nice to be working with you folks. He said sheepishly before mentally kicking himself for such a lame speech. The others certainly didn't seem to think it was lame as they all shouted, yes sir, vigorously. Then he screamed, internally of course, at the though that, now that he had accepted the orcs into his ranks, he would have to give them names. All 150,000 of them. I just want to turn into cold sweat and evaporate into nothing. Around the same time as the meeting in the Lizardmen cave were taking place, a different but no less influential hangout was underway. In the distant land of the puppet state of Gistov, in the palace of its king, Demon Lord Clayman, together with 3 other members of the 10 great demon lords, the most powerful group in the world. This group had to some extent or another supported the Majin Gelmid in his plan to turn the Orc King into an Orc Lord and Gelmid Hop to allow him to ascend to true Demon Lord status. This was not to be, however, as the allies in the Jura forest put a stop to Gelmid and his plans. Gelmid himself had assembled, at great risk to himself, this group of demon lords, all of which bordered the forests to the south and east. And they were not happy with him, especially when an unknown army attacked the orcs. Under pressure, Gelmid hastily left to the battlefield, only to get beat up by a strange masked Majin and then devoured by his own creation. The demon lords watched the events unfold through a crystal ball that was linked to Gelmud's vision, but of course his death meant the images were cut. This did not suit well with one of them in particular. That moron Gelmud, the young-looking girl shouted, eaten by his own monster. It'd be funny if we didn't lose our eyes. The girl was Milim Nava, the destroyer, and possibly the most dangerous and powerful being in the world, though few would say so based on her appearance. She looked 13 or 14 at best, pink hair tied in 2 long tails and wearing a scowl on her face worthy of any tantrum-throwing teen. Sitting around a tea table were the other lords, Clayman, the marionette master, a thin, sharply dressed man with an air of nobility about him. Frey, the Sky Queen of Fulbrosia, an extremely attractive woman with large white wings and bird-like talons for feet that radiated fines. And Carrion, the Beast King of Eurazania, a large man with beastly features that looked every part the warrior king he was. Next to them, the scantily clad Milim stood out even without her relatively tiny stature. But none of the others were fooled. She was the oldest in the room by far, an ancient demon lord that had been around since before the Great Tenma Wars and which held the nickname the Destroyer for a reason. Few even among the demon lords dared to get on her bad side. Gelmid was a fool, no doubt. Carrier agreed, coming up with this whole scheme and then getting himself killed. Right, Milim shouted between pouting, right, Frey? Milim, how should I know? The older-looking woman answered back, I had almost nothing to do with this until you dragged me here yesterday. Ah, come on, you look like you could use a break, retorted Milim with a smug smile to which Clayman could only feel a sharp pain in his temple. I'm busy though. Unlike you. Clayman, Carrion asked the thin man, what do you think? She's here now. Clayman answered, might as well. Thus the owner of the castle proceeded to catch Frey up to their plan, which concluded with the final images they had saw from Gelmid a few minutes before. His plan might have failed, but we can still try to make the best out of this. He finished, and looked around the room to gauge the intentions of his fellow lords. Frey, though she asked a few questions during his explanation, still looked rather disinterested and distant. He wondered what she was up to. Meanwhile, Carrion simply looked disappointing. Milim paid little to no attention, continually playing back the last records of Gelmud's vision with a strange glitter in her eyes. What's she up to? Milim, for her part, had tuned out much of the conversation. Her attention was firmly on the crystal ball in her hand and the interesting images it showed. She had been momentarily distracted from it by its sudden interruption, but now had little interest in anything else. That masked Majin. Who is he? She? It's hard to tell from here. she thought as she squinted her eyes to get a better look. Playing the recording over and over a few times, she noticed something weird about the flying, masked figure, though she, even with all her many centuries of experience, could not quite place the feeling down. Her intuition was telling her to investigate, and it pretty much never failed her in the past. With a grin, she turned her attention back to the others. "I can't believe you people," was the last tidbit of conversation Frey had uttered. "Now Frey, it's not as bad as looks," Clayman defended. "Since Gelmid was acting alone, we did not directly interfere in the forest," he finished with a devilish smile. "I'm not sure international treaties would be quite so lenient with your interpretation," Frey said. "In any case, it's over, right?" Carrier asked, bored. "I mean, without Gelmid the Orc Lord would just be out of control. No use to anyone." "We still don't know for sure what happened with the Orc Lord, though," Clayman countered. "It's possible that Majin killed him too, but it's unlikely." "Then let's investigate," Milim shouted, startling them slightly and tossing the crystal ball to the side casually and looking ready to take flight right then and there. "Now Milim, wait a second." Clayman stopped her. "I agree, but let's not be hasty. I would like to wait a bit and send someone else to investigate if the Orc Lord was stopped or not." Why? Because if he wasn't, there might still be a chance he succeeded in evolving. If that happened, our presence, especially yours, might interfere with that evolution. Clayman explained calmly. Both Carrion and Frey looked at each other and then at the sulking Milim. Usually this was bad news for everyone around, but her expression quickly changed as she thought it over. "Fine." Milim agreed as she casually sat back down on the sofa, hands behind her head. "Send someone over." "Thank you for your patience, Milim." Clayman could practically hear the sigh of relief from the other lords in the room. Placating Milim was not usually an easy task. Milim for her part decided that she could wait a few more days to go investigate this new interesting thing. After all, she was millennia old, a few days or weeks was quite literally nothing to her, plus, she was certain of the result. There was no way the Orc Lord would win against that Majin, even if he evolved into a Demon Lord, actually just a Demon Lord seed, but she kept that to herself, so she decided to let the younger generation play their little games for now. But as soon as you get your results, I'm paying them a visit," she proclaimed as she stretched on the sofa, looking ready to take a nap as if she owned the place. "Hold on Milim, there's still the matter of the non-interference treaty we have with the forest," Carrion interjected, but was quickly cut off by her. It doesn't matter anymore, right?" she said casually. Her companions only looked on in slight confusion. "What do you mean, Milim?" Clayman spoke up. You're all younger demon lords, so it's no surprise you don't know this." Milim started, crossing her legs. "Veldora the Storm Dragon is gone." "Yeah? Well, that treaty was only designed so that no attempt, deliberate or by mistake, was made to free him from his prison. With him gone." She let the words hang on for a while and smiled as Clayman had a look of, "Oh," on his face. "The treaty is null and void, is that what you're saying?" he finished while stoking his chin. "Yup," Milim proclaimed triumphantly as the other two in the room dawned to the same conclusion with surprised faces. "Also, to officially scrap the treaty we only need 3 demon lords agreeing on it. We got 4, right here." After a short pause, Carrion spoke up with a small, conspiratorial smile. "In that case, I don't imagine any of the others objecting. I'm all for it." "Me as well," Frey said, absent-mindedly twirling a strand of her hair. "The forest borders my land. It was always a pain to deal with all that." Clayman sighed. "Damn. Milim might look simple-minded, but she's a lot craftier than she lets on." "Oh well, very well, I agree too. I will send news to the other lords, but Milim," he said as she looked over to the girl, now sprayed on his sofa, "I still want you to wait doing anything until we get some news." Yeah, she dismissed with a wave as she picked a pillow. "And you guys will send your underlings after, right? Just as long as we agree not to interfere with each other, it's all good." She then placed the pillow on her face. The others exchanged looks. Frey and Carrion almost felt sorry for Clayman, who looked like he had another headache. "Well, I agree with her," Carrier said as he began walking out. "Let me know what you find." "Yeah Clayman." Then he was off. Frey lingered for a second, looking at the now sleeping figure of Milim with an almost envious look, but Clayman dismissed that as just his imagination. "I'm kinda busy with something. I probably won't send anyone," and she too was off. Clayman stood still for a minute as he looked over at Milim, who was now soundly snoring away on his sofa. Then with another sigh, he turned and left, closing the door behind him. There was no point in trying to chase her away now. Maybe she was doing that deliberately to get back at him for stopping her leave earlier? He wouldn't put it past her. Of course, that was exactly what she was doing. It had been a few weeks since the end of the Orc Lord incident, and Demon Lord Clayman was quite livid. As expected, the Orc had been killed and his plans, well, Gelmud's plan, but he was working for Clayman, had been for nothing. However, Clayman was not one to let even a failure go to waste. He had plans and contingencies. Right now, however, he had an unenviable job. Waking up the Destroyer, who had been not so silently napping on his sofa for weeks. Heaving one last sigh, he opened the door to the meeting room where the girl was. He had ordered his servants to stay the hell away from there, and so far there didn't seem to be any problem. But by God, the scene inside made his blood pressure rise. Aside from all the drool pooling under Milim's head on his expensive sofa, the pillows were ripped and the table lay in two halves. "Did you do that in your sleep or something?" He wanted to shout at her, but knew better. Instead, he walked over and began slowly calling her name. Eventually, the girl shot up, slightly startled. What? She said as she comically turned her head in all directions, looking for the noise that woke her up. After a few seconds her eyes landed on Clayman. Yeah, what time it is?" "About a month later, Milim," he informed her with a strained smile. "Oh," she yawned and stretched before focusing on Clayman. "How'd the investigation go?" "Well, not as good as I had hoped," Clayman began as he sat down in one of the chairs. "From what my agent found out, the Orc Lord was killed not long after Gelmud by that masked Majin. Afterwards, the Orcs were freed from his influence. But here's the interesting part." At this, Milim perked up. The races of the Jura forest, at the behest of the Dryads, met up the day after and formed a new nation, of sort. An alliance of monsters. An alliance of monsters? Interesting. Finally, Milim stood up. "And that Majin?" Clayman shook his head. "That's about all my agent was able to uncover. Apparently, this new monster nation has quite an effective defense. When my agent tried to pry further, he was quickly chased away by one of those ogres you saw in Gelmud's memories. The last thing he got was a name, Tempest." Milim let the name sink in for a second. "Tempest, huh?" Clayman nodded. He. She laughed evilly with a grin. "Then, I think it's my turn." Clayman knew this was coming, and there was no more he could really do to stop her. Even so, having her finally leave would be worth it. Before he could say anything though, Milim was already hurrying away and towards the large open window. Before she stepped out, however, she turned around and said, "Remember, no interfering with one another, yeah?" and was gone in an explosion of aura. Before he could even blink, she was already gone, accelerating beyond hypersonic speed and disappearing beyond the horizon. With another heavy sigh, Clayman went back into his castle to continue his plotting. His time was near, and when it came he would make sure that Milim would pay for treating him the way she did. It was a sunny day in the Jura forest, and Rimuru was enjoying the newly found peace and tranquility as he hopped along in his slime form on one of the newly constructed paved roads radiating from the central of the city. It felt like forever since he had any true rest, though not by lack of trying. After the conference that named him Chancellor of Jura, he had to spend a few days naming all 150,000 of the remaining orcs, which left him little more than a puddle. With that done, the orcs had been resettled all across the forests in various smaller groups and provided with the food that was generously provided by the tree ants, the patrons of the Dryads. When Rimuru returned to Tempest, or rather Rimuru, the embarrassing new name his subordinates decided unanimously to call the city, 2,000 of the high orcs had come with him, providing a massive boon to the city's construction capability. They were currently in the middle of a construction boom, and the city really did begin to look like a proper city and not a random collection of buildings. Of course, this came with massive problem to him as he was heaped with more and more responsibilities that he barely had time to himself anymore. Some king he was, yes, king. It happened shortly after returning from Lake Shisu, when they were visited by King Gazel of the Dwarves. Allegedly, the king wanted to see for himself what this new self-proclaimed alliance of monsters was and test its leader. Test my slimy bottom, he just wanted to leave the castle and have fun. Rimuru complained in his mind as he was forced to duel the king, but wisely kept to himself. Incidentally, the king was an old apprentice of Hakuro, one of the ogres, a fellow student of the same sword style, and had now began calling him his fellow student. However, despite the questionable motive to visit, Gazel did made him a massive favor by formally recognizing his new nation and entering an alliance with him. He was shocked to say the least, as he didn't expect to gain proper recognition so fast. Well, one burden off his shoulders, was what he wanted to say, but no. It was Gazel's damn question on the name of his nation that led to everyone, especially Trainee, throwing the mantle of king on him, despite his protests. Also, Gazel brought with him an old friend, Vesta, the dwarf, sketchy bureaucrat, that nearly had him thrown in prison. Apparently, after the trial, he was dismissed by the king and had in the meantime a drastic change of heart, or rather, Rimuru though, no longer had the burden of politics in his mind and could focus on his true hobby, which was research. Well, Kaijin himself had forgiven and vouched for him, so he let bygones be bygones and assigned him to the Tempest Research Division. Speaking of the Research Division, that was also where he had assigned that Gabiru, the traitorous and now exiled son of the Lizardmen chief, who similarly was a changed man reptile. Gabiru and Vesta were now hauled in Veldora's former cave, heavily invested in research. In fact, he was just now returning from the cave to the city after having an in-depth evaluation of their work. He would have a little more free time, and decided to enjoy it to its fullest. Fate, however, had other plans. As he came in sight of the city, his ability, Great Sage, blared a warning in his head. Report. A large aura has been detected heading in this direction. Caution advised, its mechanical voice said with an unusual degree of alarm that instantly put Rimuru on edge. Within moments, his magic sense was focused in the direction of the aura, and sure enough, something was coming this way. Massive would be an understatement. It made the Orc Lord look like an insect, and the speed at which it was moving was completely unbelievable. If Rimuru had to rank it, it would certainly be right up there with freaking Veldora. And judging by its trajectory, it was heading straight for him. Panicking, he decided to lead it away from the city as much as possible. In the process, he sent a quick urgent message to his subordinates. His initial assessment was right. As he moved away from Tempest, the aura changed course to intercept him. This was not good. He made it only a few hundred meters before he arrived in a flat plain with only a few trees. One of the places they had chopped down for building materials, before the aura slammed into the ground in a blur light purple. The sheer force of just that impact would have been enough to level most of the city. The force pushed out a massive dust cloud that obscured the intruder before another, much smaller burst of aura from them cleared it away. Rimuru didn't know what to think at first at the scene in front of him. From the crater stepped out a young girl, in appearance not older than 14. She had pink hair tied in two long tails on either side of her head and blue eyes that sparkled with an unknown quality to them. She was barely wearing anything. Her clothes would barely classify as underwear in most reasonable societies, but she didn't seem to care in the slightest. And she was sporting a massive grin as if she won the lottery. Now Rimuru Tempest, or rather, Satoru Mikami, considered himself an admirer of the female form and beauty, and though he had a pretty good hold on judging them. The fact that he never had a girlfriend in his life didn't really matter at all. And this girl, with her ridiculous aura, if one ignored her outfit, certainly had looks going on for her. He imagined that given 2 or 3 more years, she would be quite the looker. Even now, he would be lying to himself if he said she wasn't pretty. And even though he himself had no eyes, he found himself instantly drawn to hers. There was just something about them that made him stop in his tracks. Who is this girl? He thought to himself. As if reading his mind, the girl hastily stepped outside the crater she made and haughtily began speaking. Hello. I am the one and only Dragonoid, Demon Lord Milim Nava. You look like the strongest hombre in town, so I thought I would drop by and say hi, she finished as she dramatically posed with her hands on her hips. Demon Lord? Are ya kidding me? Great Sage? Rimuru panickingly thought to himself. Confirmed. Individual Milim Nava meets the requirements of a Demon Lord. Notice. Lower estimates of her magicule count is approximately 10 times greater than yours. Upper estimates cannot be calculated. Cannot be calculated. What does that mean? Oh dear, better think of something to say. Ah, yes. Welcome to Tempest. May I help you, young lady? He meekly asked the demon lord. Do you want something? She answered back, seemingly genuinely confused. No, I was just saying, hi, she finished with a smile. A lingering silence set in as Rimuru considered her response. That's it. Seriously. Not that I'm complaining. Again, as if she was reading his mind, the demon lord put on a somewhat disappointing face but was quickly replaced with a look of curiosity as she squatted in front of him and started poking him. Hey, are you really a slime? You're really powerful for even a Majin, let alone a slime, she said between the poking. Now Rimuru was slightly beginning to panic for real at the realization of what she said. His aura was almost completely oppressed, so how did she figured he was the strongest in the region to come directly at him? He decided to ask bluntly. Ah, how did you know I'm strong? At this, the girl closed one eye and began pointing at the other. No point in hiding from me. My dragon's eye can tell the truth of anything it sees. It can instantly tell me how strong or weak someone is, what their skills do. She got back up, striking another pose, and also, it can instantly tell me a woman's 3 sizes, she proclaimed proudly. Instantly tell a woman's 3 sizes, Interesting. No. Focus Rimuru, focus. Ah damn, with such an absurd ability there's no point in even trying to hide. Ah, that's quite the fearsome ability. He praised honestly. He had the distinct impression that lying would be of no use, even if she couldn't use that Dragonoid to tell if he was. Which, he figured, she probably could. Report. That is a very likely assessment, Great Sage interjected. Wah ha 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 ha. She laughed at his words, a laugh which distinctly reminded him of a certain dragon for some reason. Say, Mr. Slime. It's Rimuru. Rimuru Tempest, he helpfully informed her. Yes, Rimuru. You were that masked Majin who fought and trashed that moron Gelmit, right? I saw it his memories. She casually said the last part. So at least one demon lord was watching, Gelmit, you bastard. Interrupting his thoughts, she continued, but the form I saw there was a humanoid, can you morph into a human form? She asked. No point in hiding, yes, I can. To demonstrate, he quickly morphed into his human form, though he wasn't wearing the mask. At this, the demon lord had an unusual reaction. At first, she was slightly taken aback. He could swore he saw her blushing a bit, but dismissed it before she began pacing around him, even lifting a strand of his silver blue hair. Then she stopped in front of him with a thoughtful expression. Say, she began stroking her chin. Is this form supposed to be a boy or a girl? It's hard to tell. That particular question really caught him off guard. Well, how should I even answer that? Eventually he decided on something. Well, I'm a slime, so I don't have, a gender. But he stuttered and began rubbing the back of his head. I supposed for convenience sake, I identify closer to male. More or less. And, well, it was true. Gender or not, he was a guy in his past life. It would be hard to identify as anything else, even now. The answer seemed to satisfy the girl, who beamed another smile. Ah, got it. Then she just stood there, looking at him. The silence was quite awkward, so he decided to break the ice with another question. So, did you wanted anything else? Nope, she immediately said. Well, she didn't seem to be lying, so he figured now was the time to try and make her go away before she did want something. However, before he could get a sound out, he felt himself pushed back by a sudden force. Looking down, he saw Ranga, the Tempest Wolf Alpha, as he grabbed him by the shirt and began pulling him away from the demon lord at breakneck speed. His mind had little time to even think, before he saw a much bigger problem. Xian, his self-appointed secretary, swinging her massive sword in a downward arc at the demon lord from the side. No. He shouted, but was far too late. The sword made impact and another boom shook the plane. But, what is this? Wanna play? Milim asked with a toothy grin that showed off her sharp canines. There was a dangerous glint in her eyes. More importantly, Rimuru noticed. Xian's strike did absolutely nothing whatsoever to her. In fact, she caught the blade with one hand as if it was nothing, the ground below shattered into another crater, and she was holding the sword in place despite Xian trying to pry it back. Now Xian, crazy as she was by no means physically weak, but in front of this short girl barely reaching her chest she was nothing. With a smirk, Milim simply flicked her fingers at the sword, causing Xian to be violently thrown back, all the way into a tree in the nearby forest, which proceeded to explode in splinters from the impact. No, 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 Rimuru was now officially more panicked than he had ever been as he tried to get free of Ranga's grip. When he failed, he caught a nearby tree branch with both arms, crossed his legs around the wolf's neck and stopped him in his tracks. No. Listen to me, he shouted as he turned his attention back to Milim. His face paled. Like a true shinobi, Soi jumped from out of nowhere and binded Milim in a thread of steel silk, immobilizing her. She had a look of surprise but was by no means worried. Then he saw Benimaru join the battle shouting at Ranga, "Get Lord Rimuru out of here. We'll deal with her," and turned his attention to the demon lord. Rimuru jumped from the tree branch he was holding but couldn't say anything before Benimaru unleashed a hell flare with Milim straight in the middle. Normally, the young ogre could unleash a dozen or more of these, as he did during the battle against the Orc Lord, but sensing the danger he had poured nearly all of his magicules into a single, devastating spell. The black flames engulfed a large area and created a huge shockwave, and continued to burn for a few more seconds at insane temperatures. However, nice attack. A voice rang from within the raging inferno, shocking everyone. Against one of the other demon lords, this might be dangerous. But against me? Then, from within the hell flare, Milim unleashed her aura. It was not an attack, it was not even a spell, she simply released an ungodly amount of aura which disintegrated the flare, sending everyone flying as it enlarged the crater. Rimuru himself could barely hold on to dear life onto the tree he was hanging earlier. He could swore the release would be felt all the way in Dwargon. Finally, the wind died down, revealing Soi and Benimaru splayed on the ground some distance away and Milim still standing in the center of the new crater, now the only one smiling and looking content. "Well, who's next?" she asked with a more serious tone than the somewhat childish one she had used previously with him. Now Rimuru knew for sure this was a demon lord, the pinnacle of power in this world. He quickly rushed over to the closest of the ogres, Benimaru, ignoring Ranga's plea to go to safety. Calmly, he knelt down and gave him a potion. "My lord, for your own safety, you must." The red-haired ogre began, but was quickly shut down by Rimuru. "We'll discuss your hasty actions later. I'll deal with the rest." Then he began walking back towards Milim, who was observing him with a smile. "I don't suppose I can talk you out of more fighting? I can promise these guys will get the proper scolding later," he asked dejectedly. He ignored the "three idiots" look of shock at the word scolding. "Huh? I mean, I didn't come here to fight. Your pals attacked me first," she retorted, "but now I can't really back down." "Why not?" he asked, trying very hard to hide his frustration. "Well, it'd look really bad for me, ya know," she began. "Demon lords are the top dogs in this world. Backing down from a weaker opponent would make me look like a chump," she explained with a small pout. As much as he hated to say it, she wasn't as unreasonable as it would seem. It was survival of the fittest in this world. Giving up was just as bad as losing, especially to a purely power-based group the demon lords seemed to be. He still didn't like it, but I guess I did drop by uninvited. Tell ya what. Milim began, throwing her arms wide, "I'll give you a freebie." "A freebie?" he asked confused, more on how that term existed even in this world. "Yup, a freebie. You can attack me with anything you want, and I'll take it. I won't block, or retaliate or nothing. So, pretty good deal for you, she finished with a smirk as she leaned in. "But, if it does nothing, you'll admit defeat and become my follower, deal?" Frankly, Rimuru wasn't too keen of becoming a demon lord's follower, but truth be told it was probably the best he was gonna salvage out of this whole mess. He thought hard on how to respond, then came up with a crazy idea. Warning. Subject: Milim Nava's defenses far exceed all forms of attacks available. Engaging in not advised, Great Sage interrupted, but he ignored it. He was gonna stake everything on this gut instinct. He got into an attack position he had learned from Hikuro and said, "Alright. Let's go," and launched himself towards Milim, who was only smirking at him in anticipation. Warning. Great Sage tried to stop him, but he forcefully shut it down. He gathered his secret weapon in his right hand and thrusted it right into the Demon Lord's mouth. After a quick moment of making sure he hit the target, he jumped back. Silence enveloped the scene as Milim simply stood there.
"Wow, what is this? It's delicious," she screamed as she licked her lips.
"Hey, this is just honey." Rimuru smirked to himself as he watched the girl enjoy the taste. Whether it's one world or another, childish opponents are all the same. He swore he heard something coming from Great Sage, but ignored it. "Oh, you like it?" he said to Milim, drawing her attention as he produced more honey from within his storage space, continuing as she stared in wonder at the golden ball he formed. "If you admit defeat, I'll give this to you. It's the last I have." At this, the Demon Lord's eyes widened in panic. "What?" she screamed dejectedly at him. "Like hell I'll admit defeat from this."
"Is that so? Guess I'll keep it to myself and eat it all." He began licking some of the honey. Now she was really panicking. Unknown to Rimuru, Milim's head was a whirlwind since first tasting the honey.
"What is this? It's so sweet. I never tasted anything so sweet. It tastes like nectar, but how did he made like this? I have to know, I have to get my hands on more." Then she heard him say to admit defeat and the rest, admit defeat. Me? Is this guy serious? Aw, but I really want more. If he's gonna eat it all, I have to do something. I know. Thus she came up with a brilliant compromise that would let her keep both her Demon Lord pride and the honey, a true stroke of genius. "Ah, listen, I can't admit defeat, but how about we call it a draw, yeah?" She laid down her idea to Rimuru, who considered the idea carefully but looked kinda unconvinced. Hee, I predicted that," she boasted to herself, then continued, "but not just that, I'll also promise not to pick a fight with you or any of your people again. On my honor as a Demon Lord," she finished dramatically with a hand against her heart. Rimuru pondered hard her proposal. Frankly, it was better than what he had hoped. So, he decided to agree. "Alright, it's a deal. But, you have to address me as Sir Rimuru from now on, okay?" At this, she made a face of disgust. "Maybe I'm pushing my luck?"
"What? You should address me as Miss Milim, pal. I'm a Demon Lord, you know," she said, pouting. "Yeah, I'm pushing my luck." He decided to leave that be. "Okay, then you can call me Rimuru and I'll call you Milim, deal?"
"HMPH, deal? Be grateful. I only let my fellow Demon Lords call me so intimately," she declared. With a sigh, Rimuru took out a glass jar from his storage space, put the honey in it and handed it over to an exited, starry-eyed Milim, who snatched it victoriously and started gorging herself with a look of utter bliss on her face. If we weren't sitting in the middle of a massive crater she made, she would look downright harmless, Rimuru though. And honestly kinda cute, he added sheepishly, keeping it to himself. While Milim was busy, he moved over to where the ogres had assembled, watching the spectacle with a mix of awe and shame. As he approached, they keeled. "Listen, guys," he began with the most stern tone his voice could allow, which wasn't saying much. "I know you were only thinking of the best, but seriously calm down. This could have ended so badly, it's not even funny. In the future, I expect you to be more careful and considerate, yeah?" "Yes, Sir Rimuru," they shouted in unison. "Good. Alright, let's go home." Rimuru moved to hop onto Ranga and leave when he noticed Milim following close behind them. He stopped and looked at her, awkwardly. Can I help you?" The grin she immediately put on told him everything he needed to know. "I'm coming with you guys. I want to see that city I saw when I flew in, looked really fun." But, Rimuru began to speak, then their agreement moments before came to mind. Sure enough, Milim spoke what he was thinking. Our deal only said I'd not pick a fight with you guys. Didn't say to leave. Wahahaha, she roared triumphantly. At this, Rimuru mentally kicked himself. Somehow, he had let her take charge of the negotiations, and she had twisted it in her favor. He really needed to not let his guard down around her, huh? With this, his days as Milim's unofficial later official chaperone began. Rimuru Tempest, king of the Jura Tempest Federation,
personal friend of Storm Dragon Veldora and all-around nice slime, was in a dilemma.
That dilemma was the Dragonoid demon lord lowly known as Milim Nava, who was currently dragging him all over the outdoor bath. Completely naked. One had, she was on the small size, making it somewhat questionable, legally speaking. On the other, he was no longer a human, but a slime. And even more than that, she was not human either, but a freaking demon lord that was thousands of years old allegedly and didn't seem to care one bit about being seen completely exposed. And even further. No, he was just making excuses at this point. Would anyone even care he was looking? He seriously doubted.
In his own world, people as young as 13 getting married was very much the norm for the vast majority of human history.
Didn't mean he agreed, but that was just how things were. From what he gathered about this world, it wasn't far off the mark. According to Irene and her party of adventurers, the age of adulthood in most nations was 15, and monsters as young as 2 or 3 years old were considered fully grown up.
He pondered just how Milim fitted in. She obviously stopped aging a long time ago and, despite her childish persona, glimpses of a far different girl came through every so often, as expected of an individual who had probably been alive longer than half the city combined. At least that was what he had noticed in the one day he had known her. Speaking of which, his ordeal as her chaperone began shortly after their impromptu battle concluded.
Huh? Was all Rimuru could muster to say to the new developments. Milim simply ignored him and continued to laugh for a few seconds more, then abruptly stopped. Hey, any of you guys have something to drink? This thing is great but it's making me kinda thirsty. She said, motioning to the jar of honey. Of course, she didn't really need to drink, but they didn't need to know that. After a few more seconds of just staring at her, Rimuru decided it would not be worth the hassle to try and convince her to leave. So he just sighed. Sure, he said dejectedly as he turned to leave, Milim following close behind. I'll get you something in town. Thus the group began its short journey back to Tempest, Demon Lord in tow. Rimuru was riding on Ranga, with Milim right behind him. He wasn't sure if Ranga approved, but no one was stupid to refuse her now. He wondered if all demon lords were as pushy and selfish as her. He realized that, yes, probably. Absolute power corrupts absolutely, after all, and not always in the oppressive tyrant kind of way. They probably had to have been selfish and power-hungry enough to reach that point in the first place. With that though, he wondered just what drove this girl who didn't look older than 14 to become as absurdly powerful as she was. She called herself a Dragonoid. What does that even mean? He wondered to himself.
Notice, a Dragonoid is a unique race belonging to someone born of a dragon in a lesser race. Great Sage helpfully answered, the offspring of a dragon in a lesser race. Wonder how that works. Can dragons turn themselves into humans? His though was interrupted by Milim calling him from behind.
Hey, be straight with me. Have you ever considered becoming a demon lord? Rimuru honestly never even considered that an option, and he answered in kind. Nope. I haven't and I won't. Never gonna happen. If he was paying attention, he would have noticed Milim scowling at the answer.
Ever since they began moving, she tried really hard to figure out why this slime piqued her interest in the way he did. Ever since their first talk, she had this feeling, deep in her heart, that she couldn't quite make out. She wondered if maybe it was just her intuition telling her this guy had great potential to become a great demon lord, so she asked him. His answer was not what she expected.
But then why did you absorb the Orc Lord? At this question, Rimuru had to turn around in a surprise. He was met with a serious-looking Milim. Yeah, I figured that out when we first met earlier. You just have a special kind of feeling to you. Rimuru considered carefully how to answer that. I didn't absorb him to become a demon lord. He began as he turned back around. I did it to end his rampage. In the process I also saved him and the orcs. That's all. He could feel Milim's gaze on him linger for a second. So why not become a demon lord? It's quite fun, you know, you have respect, you get to fight all kinds of powerful people, you. No thanks, sounds boring. Aren't you bored of that? He could practically sense Milim making a comically shocked face, nearly dropping her jar of honey in the process. Bingo, huh? Are all demon lords just bored? Then. What do you do that's so fun, huh? Milim asked quickly. obviously no longer thinking too much about what she said. Lots of things. But I'm mostly just really busy with running my nation. He answered back, thinking the idea would push Milim to get disinterested and leave. How wrong he was. Lots of things. Hey, what are these lots of things? They can't possibly be just running a nation. What are you doing that's so interesting? Tell me, she screamed and began shaking him from the back. Ah, is she throwing a tantrum? This backfired. Abort? Rimuru began to panic again. Ah, no, it's nothing that would interest you, really, he said sheepishly, then realized it was too late. Milim wanted to see the city, and wanted to see what he was doing. There was basically nothing he could do to change that. So, he decided. Listen, if you promise to behave in my town, and that means holding back your aura and power, then I'll show you around, yeah? At this, Milim instantly calmed down and beamed a bright smile. Yeah, you got it. Hearing her say that with that smile on her face made Rimuru feel something he wasn't quite sure where to place. He decided to ignore it, and for the sake of his own sanity entertain his new friend. Huh? Why not? He decided to voice that opinion. Then I guess that makes us friends now. He answered back with a smile of his own. Hearing him call her friend, made Milim feel strange again. Friends. She muttered without anyone hearing it. As she said that, they finally came around the hill and entered the city proper. Rimuru looked over at Milim and saw her sport a look of excitement that almost made all the trouble so far seem worth it. However, he still wanted her to behave, so he began laying down some rules. Just promise me a few things, okay? Don't wander around, and don't cause trouble unless I. Before he could even finish, however, Milim was already breaking his first rule, speeding off into the street. This is gonna be a long day. Thus began Milim Nava's first day in Tempest. To put it plainly, for Rimuru it was a roller coaster of entertaining and nerve-wracking. Right off the bat, Milim got into a scuffle, or rather a one-sided curb stomp, when she ran into that dolt Gabiru who called her a little girt to her face. Lucky for him, she held back, in so much that he didn't die instantly from one punch. Scolding her seemed pointless, especially as Gabiru kinda deserved it for being rude in the first place, but still. He did ask her to not do something like that again, but she made no promises. Well, he tried. The next thing was to have everyone gather in the central square so he could formally introduce Milim to the city. Mostly so everyone knew who she was so as not to repeat the Gabiru incident. During the introduction, she grabbed the microphone out of his hands and began introducing herself. I'm Demon Lord Milim Nava, and I'll be living here starting today. Nice to meet you, she announced casually. Wah. What does that mean? He asked, pretty self-explanatory. I decided to live here for now. But don't you have your own home right now? It's fine? She said dismissively, long as I visit every now and then it'll be fine. And so she turned back to address the gathered crowd. Me and Rimuru are friends now. No, actually. Best friends. She proclaimed such, and the crowd went wild with cheers and applause. Apparently, Milim was surprisingly popular among the demon lords, despite of her reputation as the destroyer. Thus Tempest gained a new citizen, an extremely overpowered one. The day that followed was hectic to say the least. His helpful counselors decided to just throw the responsibility of handling Milim firmly of his shoulders. You're her best friend, after all, said that bastard Benimaru, and so he had to, as promised, show her around. And he found himself enjoying it, though he would deny it to hell and back if asked. Among the different things to do in Tempest, by far her favorite thing was the food. As Rimuru quickly deduced, her rather great sage informed him someone with the power of a demon lord simply no longer had any need to eat, drink, sleep or even breathe oxygen. All of their needs were met by their vast magicule reserves, making them effectively immortal. As such, things like food and drinks were simply a novelty to stimulate their senses, and stimulate her senses Milim was all about, it seemed. How does some vegetable soup taste so good? She asked as she was eating in one of the dining halls. Ah, that's the smoked meat we put in it, he informed her, to which she made the most curious expression. As she continued to eat, he decided to ask her something. Hey, is the food in your place not good? At that, her face changed into a scowl. Bad question? Blah. The cooking in my nation stops at roasted meat and raw vegetables. She informed him with disgust. Good thing I don't need food to live. Stops at roasted meat? Raw vegetables? UAA. No wonder she finds even this simple soup good. His thoughts were interrupted by Milim slamming a fist quite gently for her, as the table didn't explode into splinters, and exclaimed. Rimuru. Think you could do me a favor? She asked with pleading eyes. As much as he hated to admit, he wouldn't be able to say no to the expression she had even if she wasn't so dangerous. Think you can take one of my people in to learn all of these delicious dishes, please? Ah, sure. He didn't though this would be much of an issue, so he agreed rather quickly. His reward was another bright smile from Milim. Maybe this isn't so bad. He though with a smile of his own. The impromptu tour of Tempest continued with a visit to the workshops. He was especially eager to take her to Shuna's clothing place so that, maybe, Milim could put on some proper clothes as her usual appear left. Quite a bit to be desired. As it turned out, Shuna was quite pleased to meet Milim and quickly took to turn her into her personal fashion doll, to which the demon lord did not object. In fact, the various new outfits she gained out of it made it so that he barely convinced her to leave. Girls love new outfits, I guess, no matter what world it is or how godlike powerful they are. He thought to himself as they left, glancing at Milim, who was now wearing a sort of sailor uniform that was quite the improvement to her first one outfit. Next were the crop fields, where things escalated quickly. Seeing the hobgoblins hard at work, Milim got the idea to lend a hand. Rimuru was skeptical at first, but it turned out had no reason to worry. Quite the opposite. Milim was a quick learner, to put it simply. After having one demonstration of what to do, she proceeded to till the fields like an expert that had done it her entire life. And by tilling the field, he did not mean one parcel or two. No, she did almost the entire thing in a few minutes, moving so fast even he had trouble keeping up. And somehow, there was no dust or insane wind speed from her movement. He reasoned she suppressed both with her aura, or something. In any case, she did the job of hundreds of workers in less than an hour, much to the shock and cheers of the guys working. Everyone except Ririna, who was livid that her carefully laid schedule for the crops were completely ruined. Rimuru quickly took Milim out of there before the Goblina could say anything. By the time night fell, he was mentally done. Even if he had some fun along the way, he mostly had the pain of keeping Milim in check from this and that, and just couldn't be bothered to do anything else as he led her to the main dining hall where all his counselors were gathered. There, they had a nice diner suite, delicious curry, and began talking about various small things. You are just amazing, bestie. Milim bellowed in between messy mouthfuls. He wasn't sure exactly what she was referring to, but decided not to ask. How do you even think of all these amazing things? He wanted to say something along the lines of, I'm not that amazing, but was interrupted by a certain ogress. Foo foo foo, even Lady Milim recognizes your greatness, Lord Rimuru. Sheehan said in between equally messy mouthfuls, no, don't encourage her, he wanted to shout, but though better of it. Just keep eating, Rimuru. Keep eating. A conversation erupted among the group on what Sheehan had said, but he decided to tune it out. Instead, he looked over at Milim, who stopped eating and was also staring at him, a small smile on her lips. Was she serious? He wondered. Me? Amazing? Nothing here would have been possible without everyone's hard effort. As if reading his mind this was becoming a regular occurrence, Milim spoke up among the chatter. Yeah. I mean, nothing here would exist without Rimuru, right? She asked no one in particular. Indeed. Surprisingly, it was Hakuro who answered, talent is useless without a proper guidance, after all. The people of this city came together to make all this because they believe in Lord Rimuru. He finished with a grandfatherly smile. Yes, indeed, said Rigard, nodding vigorously, as another round of chatter erupted among the occupants of the room, all about how he was somehow the greatest thing to ever exist. He looked over at Milim again, who just continued to eat and smile. This girl is dangerous, in more ways than one, he thought, finding himself smiling back. A while later, after everyone finished eating, Shuna asked Milim if she would like to take a bath. Milim asked where the bathroom was, confused. Apparently, bathrooms with small bathing pools are the norm in this world, even for aristocrats, so she was rather confused when she was directed outside. Of course, confusion turned to excitement when she saw the massive onsen they had built. So much so that she didn't hesitate to take everything off and jump in. Of course, Only the women, specifically Shuna and Xian, were with her, while the guys, him included, sadly, waited their turn.
Much to Rimaru's mix of delight and trepidation, a few minutes later Milim burst through the door wearing nothing but a towel, excitedly explaining how you could even swim in the onsen, it was that big. You're not supposed to swim in the onsen, though, he wanted to say, but before he could make any sound she snatched him off the table. He was now in his slime form and ran off into the onsen with Shuna and Xian running after her.
And thus, Rimuru Tempest ended up in his current predicament, being used as a water ball by Milim as Shuna and Xian just watched from the sidelines.
Eventually, however, the demon lord tired and let him rest.
She herself looked really content, just soaking up in the heat. He could barely tell it was the same person from a few seconds ago. With her hair down like this, she looked quite a bit more pretty than she already was. If it wasn't for her more excitable part of her personality, he could almost feel safe with having her around. He continued to keep an eye on her. I am not ogling. Thank you very much, he reassured himself and kinda lost track of time. At some point, both Shuna and Xian had left the pool to dry off, leaving them by themselves, and the night sky got completely dark and covered in stars. Hey, Rimuru. Milim's voice sounded softer than usual as she spoke, looking up into the night sky. Even the stars look kinda nicer from here, she absent-mindedly said.
What is she talking about? He wondered, looking up himself for a moment. They look about the same to me.
No, it's true. I've been around you known, and, as she said so, she moved a little closer to him and got lower so they were at eye level. This is the best spot I've found, she finished with a playful smirk. Ah, is that so? Glad you like it, he said as he turned to look up again and try and see what she was talking about, and certain not to avoid eye contact. After a while, he could feel her leaning against him. At least she's not thrashing me all over the pool. They stayed like that for a while, until Rimuru thought to ask her something that he was curious about. Hey, Milim? Yeah? Came her immediate response. I was just wondering. Why did you become a demon lord? At this, the girl's blue eyes suddenly became distant, as if she was recalling a long-forgotten memory. He saw a flash of sadness in them, but it was quickly gone as she responded. Ah, something bad happened, and I got really angry? Why are you asking me? He asked confused, noting that Milim seemed to look confused herself. I don't know, it was a long time ago, so I forgot, she dismissed as she turned to look away. Oh. It probably wasn't a pleasant memory, huh? Rimuru realized. Seeing her look all dejected like that just feels wrong, somehow. If there was one thing Rimuru came to realize about Milim Nava during the short time he knew her was that being sad just didn't suit her at all. But more than that, she never let it drag her down for more than a moment. Sure enough, she was right back to her cheerful self before he could even feel sorry for her, splashing water all over him. This time, however, he decided not to try and calm her down and just enjoyed himself for once too. It was a few days since Demon Lord Milim had decided to move into Tempest. They were, to Rimuru at least, pure chaos, as he tried to juggle keeping her from destroying something, running the city and the daily training with Hikuro and the others. Somehow, however, he managed to do it. He deserved a pat on his slime back for that. With Milim at least, he could at least leave her be with Shuna to be her dress-up doll. She seemed content enough to just try anything new, even if it was just clothes she didn't need. And so far, even when he wasn't around, she managed to hold herself back well enough to not cause too much trouble. Relatively speaking, Rigard was still twitching from all the doors she had destroyed, but otherwise nothing major. He would buy the old hobgoblin a drink later. To alleviate some of his problems in the form of an overpowered teen girl, he tasked Kurobe and Kijin with making Milim a special pair of gauntlets that would reduce the strength of her punches. It was a daunting task, but somehow the two succeeded, and Milim quickly took to the dragon gauntlets, even wearing them with outfits that just didn't match, and didn't seem to mind at all the real reason he gave them. Even if he didn't tell her, he was not foolish enough to think she didn't realize that Dragon Eye was scary. Today, he left her with Shuna to try on more outfits. Right now, he was located in Veldora's old cave, having a meeting with Vesta and Gabiru about their potion production. After a quick report on Gabiru's efforts to grow Hypoku plants, Vesta brought out a vial and placed it on the table in front of Slime Rimuru. This is my latest version of the healing potion. he said proudly, though unlike their time in Dwargo it was absent of arrogance and more genuine. What do you think, my lord? Rimuru gave the potion a quick once-over, absorbing part of the liquid to allow Great Sage to analyze its content. After a short pause, he replied. It's the same thing that I make. With the help of Great Sage, he added to himself, it's a full potion. A draught that will restore full health. Well done. He praised them honestly. Gabiru threw his hands in the air and cheered, while Vesta had a look of disbelief cross his face. Kaijin came behind him and gave him a good, hearty pat on the back, much to Vesta's embarrassment. The two had, over the last few weeks since Vesta arrived here, gotten friendly, and Rimuru would have found it hard to believe the two were bitter enemies not long ago if he didn't saw it for himself. In fact, he thought that the two were a little too friendly, chatting away in their difficult-to-understand technical jargon that just went over his head. After a while, he realized he was basically forgotten and, not finding a good moment to interrupt, decided to just leave silently. He quickly made his way through the cave lit up by the newly created magic steel light cables and arrived outside via the teleportation pad set up by Vesta, and just as he was hopping off it, a massive column of flame shot up from one of the main streets ahead of him. Oh no! Though as he quickly took human shape, grew a pair of wings and flew over as quick as possible. As he landed, he saw a large crowd, among which stood Soe. Soy, what the hell is going on? My apologies, sir. He said as he bowed. We detected some intruders, but were too slow to respond. He followed Soe's gaze and landed on a sight that filled him with a dread feeling. Milim was standing over a guy he never saw before, with another pair some distance away, shaking in abject fear from her aura. And closer to Rimuru was Rigard, who was kneeling on the ground with his back to him. As Rimuru moved closer to get a better look, the hobgoblin turned to look at him. "Aarrrgg!" Rimuru screamed internally at the sight of half of his face literally melted off, one eye socket empty. It made him thankful slime didn't have a nausea reaction, because that would have definitively made him puke otherwise. Before he could say anything, Rigard spoke up. Oh, Lord Rimuru, thank goodness. He stopped when he saw his lord's reaction to his injury and quickly tried to talk it off as if it was nothing. No, please, this is fine. I'm fine. Rimuru was not convinced. What? There's nothing fine about that. Here, have a healing potion, idiot. He splashed some healing liquid directly on the hobgoblin's face. Miraculously, everything was back to normal in a blink. Even the eye restored as if nothing happened. As he was investigating to see if anything else was wrong with Rigard, he heard Milim quickly approaching them. Hey, Rimuru. These jackasses were harassing your people, but don't worry, your bestie took care of them. Wahahahaha, she proclaimed, looking proudly about herself. Rimuru was kinda mad. He was ready to explode at her, and she must have noticed because she quickly started to try and make excuses. No, it's fine. They're not from Mu City, so it doesn't count. Yeah? As far as he was concerned, it did count. He was about to say as much when Rigard hastily interjected. Lord Rimuru, wait. It's not Lady Milim's fault at all. In fact, she saved us, please listen. Until then, Rimuru had never heard Rigard talk about Milim with anything short of annoyance, so to hear him say that made him pause. It's true, sir. As much as I hate to admit my failure, he heard Soy speak from behind. Then the two began to recount the earlier events. The city square was busy as always, with various workers moving to and from. It was a peaceful day, with the sun shining brightly and a cool but refreshing autumn air about. Rigard was making his daily paces through the city, ensuring everything was in working order, when a commotion on the main street caught his attention. The crowd parted to reveal a quadruplet of what he assumed were beastmen from their beastly features, including tails, also called lycanthropes for their ability to turn partially or fully into a beast form. There was a tall one with cat-like features sporting dark armor and a haughty smirk on his face, a large ape-like man, a thin one that had goat-like horns, and a small, rodent-like one. They strode into the city as if they owned the place, stopping when they reached the middle of the square. This is a nice town you have here, perfect for Lord Carrion to rule, don't you think? He asked no one in particular as he looked around. Hearing the man say that riled Rigard's ire, but he contained himself. He had to follow Lord Rimuru's rules of not picking fights with strangers. After all, he approached the four calmly and said,
Welcome to Tempest, may I be of assistance? I am the main administrator of this city, Rigard, he said politely, but the tall man did not seem keen on returning the favor.
I said, this would be a nice place for my lord, Demon Lord Carrion to rule over. Did you not hear me? The man retorted with anger. At this, Rigard had only one thing to say. You must be joking. This angered the tall beast man even further, and with no warning hit Rigard across the face, sending him flying across the pavement. But he wasn't finished, as when he turned to the gathered crowd he saw they were less scared and more outraged, scowling at him. Know your place, weaklings, he shouted and created a ball of flames in his right hand. In a flash, he launched it straight at the crowd. The ball created a large amount of flames in its wake. Right before it hit the panicking crowd, however, a blur of pink appeared right in front of them. With a quick motion that even Soe, who had just arrived on the scene, couldn't discern, Demon Lord Milim deflected the wall of flame into the air, away from the city. The tall beast man was shocked to say the least, but this quickly turned to terror as he saw a dangerous red aura surrounding the girl. That was when the realization of who she was hit him. Demon Lord Milim, he screamed, preparing another fireball, but it was too late. Before he could even blink, Milim had appeared right in front of him, striking him with a heavy fist straight in the stomach, knocking him unconscious before he even hit the pavement. As Soy finished the explanation, Rimuru could really only stare in disgust at the sprayed, unconscious body of the beastman in question. Whatever anger he had with Milim for breaking her promise was gone, as he was now fully focused on him. He absent-mindedly heard Soy continue. There were even children among the crowd. He still didn't hesitate to shoot. Okay, now I'm really pissed. How dare this trash? Rimuru took a deep breath, trying to calm himself down before he let his anger take over and cause him to take rash decisions. He turned to Milim, who had an unusually serious look on her face as she observed him. Milim, thank you for protecting my people. I don't like that you picked a fight, but thank you for that. Just let us handle it in the future, okay? He said softly to her, and was a bit taken aback when she scowled at him. I live here too, you know, she proclaimed, balling a fist. I can't just stand by and watch, right? She sounded like she was trying to convince him, so he decided to let her be for now and sighed. Yes, you live here, but unless it looks like we can't handle it, stay out of it, okay? She didn't look entirely convinced, but nodded as she crossed her arms. She's pouting again. He thought as she took the now fairly familiar, pouty face, which he certainly did not find cute. Not at all. In any case, his attention was drawn to Rigard, who had bowed his head to Milim. Thank you very much for the assistance, Lady Milim, he said with sincerity, followed by several of the citizens from the crowd she had protected. It must have took her seriously off guard because her face flashed a shade of red, but only for a second. Of course, no problem at all for me, wahahahaha. She must really not have thought much of it, huh? He thought as he gauged her reaction. He decided that maybe he could thank her too, later, with a special dish of food. Until then, however, there was the issue of what to do with the intruders. Want me to take out the trash? He heard Milim say, pointing at the unconscious beastman. He decided to cancel the dish. A while later, Rimuru was sitting in the lobby of their new governmental building, with the leader of the beast men, who had regained his consciousness and introduced himself as Phobio, sitting across from him. His counselors were sitting behind him, while Milim was sitting on a sofa way back, eating lunch as if nothing was wrong. He supposed to her, this was nothing. After the man introduced himself, Rimuru realized he was by far no weakling. Great Sage estimated his magicules to be higher than Benimaru. He really hoped he could salvage the situation, but he made no effort to hide his displeasure at Phobio's actions, allowing his aura to emerge freely. It seemed to work, or at least he thought it did. Having Milim around certainly seemed to knock the haughty idiot a peg or two down. So, let's get straight to the point. Why are you here? Rimuru asked. Why the hell would I answer to some lowly slime? Phobio shot back, earning himself the full and undivided anger of the ogres. Hey, stay out of this. Rimuru ordered them, to which they stepped back down. Ha ha, what a bunch of weaklings. Taking orders from some slime. Phobio laughed. Rimuru's patience was straining thin, but he managed to hold it together. Listen, I'm running out of patience here, so you better start talking,
he warned, increasing his aura by bit to emphasize how serious he was. Though Phobio was likely stronger than Benimaru, Rimuru was confident that he could take the idiot on if need be. The display seemed to have worked as Phobio settled down and scowled at him.
Tisk, fine. We're here to investigate this city for Demon Lord Carrion, the Beast King, and… Peef, ha, good one, Milim rudely interrupted from the sofa. Rimuru turned his attention behind to see her laughing. Is there something you want to say, Milim? He asked with a hint of annoyance. He had hoped she would stay out of this part, but it didn't seem likely. For her part, Milim seemed to have turned on her more serious mode, and continued talking as she stood up. Yeah, this guy is full of crap. No way Carrion would send such an idiot over here to make contact with you guys. She calmly explained as she stepped forward, stopping at Rimuru's right side with her arms crossed. Also, he knows I'm here. He agreed not to interfere with me, so he definitely would not send such an idiot here. He's here on his own. Aren't ya? She finished with a mocking grin directed at Phobio, who looked like someone had just caught him with his pants down. He was definitely angry, vein throbbing and everything. We were sent to the forest. He began, sounding as if he was having trouble piecing together his thoughts through his anger. The guy definitely had some issues, Rimuru concluded. But not to my city, is that correct? Rimuru interrupted him. Your lord sent you to investigate the Orc Lord battle. Over at Lake Shisu, not here, correct? You certainly were not told to invade my city and attack my citizens, were you? He concluded. If Demon Lord Carrion did indeed wanted to recruit them, sending this guy was the worst possible choice. Maybe he did send him, but the meathead completely misinterpreted the orders. Or maybe Milim overestimates this Carrion guy, Rimuru thought to himself as he looked between the angry Phobio and calm if smug Milim. He decided to try and de-escalate the atmosphere a little. Hey, Milim, thanks for the input, but could you please stay out now? He kindly asked her. Ah, sure, I said what I wanted anyway, she said and casually strolled back to the sofa, bringing her jar of honey out of her storage space as she plopped down. Once he was sure the Demon Lord was no longer interested, Rimuru turned his attention back to the Beast Man, considering his words carefully. Listen. Your actions here today could very well spark a conflict between your lord and our alliance, depending on how things go. Is the decision to go to war with the entire Jura forest yours, or your master's? With the severity of his actions put forth in such a manner, it seemed that Phobio finally realized exactly what he had done. His eyes widened and his anger seemed to subside for a moment, and he considered how his master would react. Seeing this, Rimuru decided to end the conversation. You should leave, and tell your master that if he wants something from me, he can send a proper envoy and I'll gladly entertain negotiations. But you are not welcomed here anymore. Leave, he ordered sternly, to which Phobio's anger seemed to return. The Beastman slammed his fist in the table, got up, and began to walk out. He stopped in the door, however, and glanced at Milim, who only smiled and made a little mocking wave. Phobio's vein looked ready to explode as he finally stepped out, his lackeys closed behind. The guy needs to seriously calm down a bit, thought Rimuru as he watched him leave, then turned to Milim. Now then. Hey, Milim, can I ask you a few things about Carrion? At this, she again had a serious look on her face. Sorry, but I can't tell you anything. We have an agreement, you see. She rebutted his request, but she did admit they had an agreement, which gave him an idea. He quickly moved over to the sofa and plopped down beside her, leaning in a bit. Is it an agreement with just Carrion, or all the demon lords? She however didn't look like she was gonna budge on the issue, so he decided to play dirty. Aw damn, so you can't even tell your best friend, huh? It's a shame, he said with fake but surprisingly genuine disappointment. That seemed to move her, as she quickly began to fidget and panic. One more push, he thought, maybe you don't care what happens to your bestie. That did it. Milim was now genuinely shocked, looking almost ready to cry. Though he felt kinda bad about it, for now he needed information. No, I do care, it's just… Milim stuttered for a bit more before shouting, fine. But only what relates to you, okay? She said, not realizing that was more or less what he wanted. Of course, information on the other demon lords might be valuable, but for now all he needed was to know about her agreement with Carrion and what their intentions were. Of course, he answered as he sat back and listened to her story. About how Gelmud approached her, Carrion and Clayman, and how she later dragged Frey into supporting his plan to create the Orc Lord and ascend him into a demon lord they could control. Apparently, to do anything major among the demon lords, a voting system was in place that required at least 3 supporters to pass, so having a demon lord under one's control certainly seemed to him like a way to cheat the system. Of course, he and his subordinates had completely ruined Gelmud's plan. Afterwards, the 4 agreed to investigate the battle to see who came out victorious, though Milim claimed she knew the Orc Lord would lose the moment she saw Rimuru in the crystal ball. She lost all interest in the original plan when she glimpsed his fight against Gelmud and was now only interested in goofing around with him, which he certainly preferred over what the other demon lords might have played. He decided to ask what those plans might be.
"Ah, I really shouldn't tell, but whatever," she answered with a shrug. "Carrion will probably try to recruit you to join him, but he's a pretty level-headed guy, so he'll be mostly reasonable about it."
Frey. She crossed her arms and looked up, and though I doubt she's interested, she looked distracted by something else. "I don't think you should worry about her." Then there's Clayman. At this, she scowled and closed her eyes, silent for a few seconds. "Dunno about that guy. He's always scheming something, though." She trailed off and threw her hands up in surrender. "Well, that's all I got." "Really?" he asked, disappointed, but this time it didn't look like it was gonna convince her as she just threw herself across the sofa, unusually silent. "Well, alright, that's enough for now. Hey." Sometimes in the middle of Milim's explanation, he had turned back into his slime form, and now the demon lord grabbed him and began using him as an impromptu pillow. Before he could protest further, though, she was already fast asleep. "Great," he thought as she began to droll on him a bit. "Is this revenge on me for guilt-tripping her into talking? Nah, probably not." Of course, it was exactly that. He and his subordinates spent the next few hours discussing the information they had gathered from Milim, and whatever Soy could piece together about the demon lords, going back and forth on how to react if they were approached again. As night rolled around, the party began to scatter, and eventually he was left alone with Milim, still serving as her pillow well into the morning. If asked if he minded, he would say yes. But that would be a lie. Damn that Milim. Phobio's scream rang out in the forest, followed by a loud crack as his fist made an entire tree fall over. How humiliating! Lord Carrion would never have fallen so low.
"Sir Phobio, please calm down," one of his companions tried to interject. With Demon Lord Milim there, even Lord Carrion would have trouble.
"Shut up. That's not the only problem. That damn slime was right. Even without her there, I messed up. This will only cause trouble for our lord."
He finished dejectedly. His comrades understood exactly where he was coming from.
To the lycanthropes of Eurazania, Beast King Carrion was a legend, a warrior who had risen to the rank of Demon Lord hundreds of years prior and who became a symbol of their strength and hope as he led the defense of their home in the Great War. No one among the beastmen did not greatly respect or even revere the king. To be of use to him was the greatest desire among the warriors of the kingdom, and to cause him trouble the greatest dishonor. His comrades looked on with pity as a voice rang out from somewhere deeper in the forest. I understand well your frustration. Keeping it under control is quite difficult, isn't it?" The 4 beastmen quickly turned to the source of the voice. From among the darkness of the overgrowth, a large shadow emerged and jumped right in front of them. It was a large, fat man in a jester costume, wearing an angry mask. "Who are you?" Phobio demanded as he prepared his claws. "I am Footman, the angry clown, a member of the moderate Harlequin Alliance. Pleasure is all mine. Beastman of Eurazania." The large clown introduced himself with a light bow. From behind him, a much smaller clown, a small girl, emerged wearing a mask with a crying face. "And I'm Tear, the teardrop clown," she said as she waved. The 4 beastmen were slightly stumped, especially Phobio. Despite their looks, they had a certain dangerous aura about them. He exchanged glances with his comrades before focusing on the intruders. "Moderate Harlequin Alliance. Never heard of it. Now what do you want?" "We're an odd jobs mercenary group, you see." The girl started as she moved in front of the group. "And we have a proposition for you." Thinking carefully, Phobio decided that he had allowed his anger to rule him for quite enough that day. These clowns were not worth it pushing it further, so he just turned around and began leaving. Not interested. I want nothing from you fishy-looking clowns, however.
Demon Lord Milim, at the mention of that name, he stopped and glanced back at the girl. Needs to be taught a lesson, doesn't she?
How do you want power? The angry clown interrupted, getting right in his face. Because we can offer you power. The power to defeat even a demon lord, the girl added. Despite the protests of his companions, Phobio decided to hear the two clowns out, listening intently to their explanation about the coming awakening of the great beast known as Charybdis and how the two clowns knew of a way to take it. Deep inside, Phobio thought that the whole thing sounded sketchy. But at the same time, he realized that he could just not face his lord after the trouble his actions would certainly cause. His shame was too great, and he had an opportunity to wipe away some of it. Tell our lord I formally quit from the three beastketeers. Any action I take from now on is on my own. No fault will fall on anyone but me. He told his companions before walking off into the darkness with the clowns. In the midst of the many new buildings in Tempest, by far the most popular were the public hot baths. They were Rimuru's pride, a luxury he had pushed hard forever since he first became the leader of the Hobgoblin village. Even as a slime, dipping in the warm waters was extremely refreshing, a sentiment shared by pretty much everyone who visited them. After a long day of work, nothing beat soaking in its warm waters. Speaking of hard work, there was plenty of it still going on in the ever more bustling city that had grown out of their modest initial huts. Rimuru himself had plenty of things to keep him occupied, though most were out of necessities, and the issues never seemed to stop coming for more than a few moments. For example, just a few weeks ago, shortly after the visit of the Beakman, his goblin riders brought in a group of humans they had found in the forests, battling against a number of high-level magical beasts. Among them were Aren, Gildo and Kabul, the three adventurers that accompanies Shizu, the woman Rimuru's human appearance was based on. With them was Fuse, the leader of the Free Association in Bloomond, a small kingdom neighboring the Great Forest, who had apparently been dispatched by its government to investigate the rumors of the supposed monster nation that arose overnight. The man seemed reasonable enough, though he was a bit of a worrywart in Rimuru's opinion. In any case, they got along quite well and he was easy to convince that their nation posed no harm. He even agreed to use his contacts to spread the word about the friendly nation of monsters to as many people as possible. The free vacation he spent for a few weeks in the city certainly seemed to help. More importantly, however, was the larger group, an ad hoc militia of rogues, petty thieves and other assorted petty offenders forced to join in on the defense against the increased monster incursions in the kingdom of Falmouth, a large and prosperous nation bordering the forest in the west. They were led by Yam, a crude but good man that genuinely cared about this group of bandits turned guards that had been forced by the kingdom into an unenviable position, either face jail time or the monsters. He had helped Cabal's group and by extension had attracted the attention of Rimuru, who came up with the crazy idea of turning him into a champion, the figure who people would believe defeated the Orc Lord. He wanted it to be a hero, but according to Milim that was decidedly not a good idea. Heroes in this world was a serious thing that only those chosen by the system could call themselves. Calling oneself a hero willy-nilly was a sure way to invite disaster on oneself. So he settled on champion. Somehow, after a little deliberation, Yam accepted. Rimuru suspected he quickly regretted that, as he was put through the ringer of Hikuro's hellish training. In a few short weeks, he and his group were turned from rogues into damn near proper warriors, then given high-grade weapons and armor and sent back into Farmus to spread the word of the champion who defeated the Orc Lord. And possibly spread word of the helpful, friendly town of monsters located deep in the forest that assisted generously. Thus was born Rimuru's long-term plan to bridge the divide between humans and monsters. It was tiring work, with everyone working hard. Even Milim made herself helpful, mostly by assisting Cabal's group in hunting down the rampaging magic monsters in the forest. Child's play for her, really, but once the influx of travelers he expected to see once his plan kicked into motion, it would make all the difference. Speaking of Milim, he had gotten to know her quite a bit better over the last few weeks. At first he tried to get closer from his perspective. She already considered them close to coax as much info as possible of what she knew of the demon lords. However, he found she was, in fact, smarter than she let out because she was not falling for it. She would just smile and change the subject every time he tried to approach it, so after a while, he just gave up, though he did begin to appreciate her more than just an idiot. During his failed coaxing, he dragged her or rather allowed her to follow him all over the town and made sure she was never far from something fun. Even when he gave up on prying info, he continued to do so. The way she smiled and her eyes sparked at even mundane things that were new to her, he found himself unable to say no. Indeed, he found himself unable to deny many of her selfish requests, though he did try to moderate it. For her part, Milim seemed to tone said requests down a bit over the following weeks. Maybe it was because she had other things to do now, such as helping Cabal's party in monster hunting, but there she was, being almost considerate. She had snuck her way into the everyday life of Tempest, and no one seemed to be complaining anymore, not even him. He began to notice little things about her too. For once, she was smart, but just could not be bothered most of the time and just did whatever came along. Maybe she lived for so long, even thinking became a chore to her, was what he though. She hated vegetables, and not necessary in a kitty, their gross kind of way, as she liked them just the same when they were cooked. Just the sight of them raw however turned his face into one of the best triggered poker face he had ever seen. There were other small things here and there, but the most jarring happened the night before when, after a day of restless fun, she just sort of fell asleep sitting on a bench. As a gentle slime, he was obliged to take her to a proper bed, so he picked her up in a piggyback ride and headed for her room. Along the way she woke up and still half asleep began talking. "Is this country that important to you, Rimuru?" she asked slowly. "What's this I hear?" "It's because it's the country I built. It and everyone in it are important to me," he answered honestly. "Aren't you scared? Important things are fragile. Aren't you scared of losing them?" "I am scared, but I can't let that hold me down." "Me too. I've always," she said as she tightened her hold on him, but not enough to cause him any discomfort. "Just go back to sleep, okay," he told her gently. He thought about the things she said, wondering just how many things and people she could have lost over the long lifespan she probably had. Thinking about that, it made much more sense why she was so selfish. Maybe it made it easier for her to let go. Or maybe she could pretend it didn't affect her too much losing something. He wondered about the things that he had lost over his 37 years in his old life, and tried to multiply it by centuries. He quickly abandoned that though before he dragged himself into a depression, though. Next day, he had some spare free time in the afternoon, along with his counselors, so he decided to invite them all, Milim included, over for a picnic. They spent the day like that as more people began to arrive, curious what their master was doing, so the whole thing evolved into almost a festival kind of thing. He didn't complain. Seeing the smiles on everyone's faces made all the work he had put in over the last few months more than worth it. He was especially happy to see Milim back to her plucky self. Serious, unhappy Milim just wasn't right. Though his heart skipped a beat when, in the evening, she grabbed him in slime form and ran off into the baths with Shuna and Xian, but he dismissed that though. Slimes didn't have hearts, after all. He also tried to convince himself he wasn't looking at her too much. Again. This time, though. "No, I'm definitely looking," he pondered to himself as he watched her and Xian get into a water splashing battle. "I like her. She's a fun friend to have, I admit that much." But. He realized then that Milim had occupied his thoughts almost all the time ever since she first arrived. First his worry about all the trouble she would cause him, but now it was just in general, such as how he would sometimes work on paperwork and suddenly think, "I wonder how Milim's doing," or, "I wonder if she'd like to try this new fun thing I though of." Eventually, he just decided he would deal with the issue at another time. Right now, he had so much work to look forward to, he was too exhausted. After an hour of soaking, the four left the baths. Rimuru, in slime form, was being carried by Milim while she was arguing with Shuna over her hair. "Lady Milim, you really should dry your hair first," Shuna tried to scold her, to no avail. It's fine, it's not like I'll get sick or something," Milim casually dismissed her. They continued for a little more as they walked through the street. Suddenly, he could feel Milim tense up at something. Before he could react, she had handed him over in a hurry to Shuna, who was shocked as he was. Xian seemed to have picked up whatever Milim did because the two got into a fighting stance right facing the same way. "What's going on?" He tried expanding his magic sense but felt nothing hostile, only something familiar. Before he could put his proverbial finger on it, a transparent form shimmered into existence in the spot the two girls were looking at. "Who goes there?" Xian demanded. Rimuru had already identified the aura, and sure enough the figure was a dryad. "Wait, it's fine. It's a friend," he calmly informed the two. Xian seemed to recognize the figure and stood down, while Milim, no longer on guard, looked over in curiosity. "I am Tria, the Dryad. It's been a long time, Chancellor." The Dryad named Tria, whom he remembered as one of the Dryads that accompanied Trainee a while back, spoke politely. "I remember, you were with Trainee. What brings you along, and what's this weird aura I'm feeling all of a sudden?" He asked and wondered if said aura, which did not belong to the Dryad, was what got Milim on edge. "I bring grave news from my sister. The monster Charybdis has returned, and it is heading for this land." Needless to say, the news that Tempest was in the path of a monster needed an urgent meeting with everyone important in the city. He sent out a communication to all of his counselors, Vesta and Gabiru, and even Fuse to meet up in the central hall. Thankfully, he didn't make a fool out of himself by asking, "What the heck is Charybdis?" as Great Sage helpfully informed him. Charybdis, the ruler of the skies, was a calamity-class monster with no intelligence or will of its own. Quite literally just a flying calamity that destroyed indiscriminately. It also had a number of monsters called megalodons that appeared with it whenever it was on the move. Worst thing was that it couldn't be killed. As a spiritual life form, its physical body was just a collection of magicules, and as long as its core remained intact it would continuously resurrect itself, though it would require a vessel to do so, like a corpse. Centuries prior, however, a hero managed to defeat and put its core in a seal. "I can't imagine the hero's seal would be undone with no reason," Hikuro said in his usual calm tone. "Perhaps it was undone on purpose?" "My sister said as much," Tria said from where she was sitting down, resting. "Right now, she and my other sisters are doing their best to keep it at bay, but they will not last. It will eventually move on, and we are in its path. I estimate 4 days, at most, before it arrives." The meeting continued for a few more minutes as they decided what to do. The main part they all agreed to was to evacuate the city so that at least the citizens would survive. The rest, however, they had little idea. Given Charybdis' implied strength in the stories, it was safe to assume all the assembled forces of Tempest had few if any chances of taking it in direct combat. Vesta was dispatched to inform King Gazel in the hope that he would honor their treaty and send help, but aside from him Rimuru could not hope for much. Seriously, just when things were settling down too. My luck is just rotten, isn't it? He complained to himself. Trying to search his brain for a solution was pointless. Even Great Sage only advised him to not engage Charybdis, much like it did with Milim. Wahahahaha, aren't y'all forgetting someone? The person in question bellowed. A pink aura enveloped her and in a flash she was back to wearing her usual, skimpy outfit. She proudly held a grin on her face and struck a pose. "Just leave it to me. I'll deal with this beast in a flash." Wait, of course. I can let Milim handle it. Why didn't I think of that? Why didn't you think of that, Great Sage? Rimuru screamed internally. Report. The question, can individual Milim Nava handle Charybdis, was not posed, the sage informed him in a monotone. As useful as it was, Great Sage was not omniscient. If the wrong question was asked, it could not provide the right answer. He wanted to complain more, but decided to celebrate the newfound solution instead. You would? Oh man, I could kiss her for. Wait, where the hell did that came from? He furiously stopped, wondering what he was thinking, but was distracted by the demon lord laughing even harder. Of course, that dumb fish is no match for me. I can fly over right now, take it out, and be home in time for dinner, she proclaimed as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. Rimuru didn't remember when was the last time he smiled so broadly. I will make you the greatest feast you ever had if you do this for me. He wanted to tell her, previous thoughts already forgotten. However, Shuna and Xian had other plans. We can't allow that, Lady Milim, Xian told her. What? Milim and Rimuru screamed in unison, though Rimuru wisely did so only in his head. Hey, what are you on about? He wanted to say but was interrupted by Shuna. That's right, this town is our responsibility. We can't take advantage of our friendship to have you solve all out problems. No, we totally can. She's the one who suggested it. He continued his internal tirade at them. What is wrong with you people? Only when we are completely at a loss and out of options, only then we will ask for your help, Shuna informed. And Milim, though disappointingly looking, backed down, pouting with a weak, fine. Then looked at him with pleading eyes that just begged him to say something. I'm done. I'm dead. Ah, it looks like I need to put up an act too, huh? He took a deep breath, then with the most sincere smile he could muster and told her, that's right, Milim. Have some faith in me. He felt like if he was in a human body, this act would be utterly failed as he would be trembling like a leaf. Good thing he was in his slime form. He thought he saw a flash of some emotion in Milim's eyes he didn't saw before, but it was quickly gone. I do have faith in you, she said genuinely, but he could barely make it out. Then she sat in a corner, sulking. I feel like crying too, Milim. Looking over at the sulking demon lord, he got an idea, however, but there is something you can help me with. Before he could even finish the sentence, Milim was already up, all traces of disappointment gone. What is it? I'll do anything. Just say the word, she excitedly claimed as she got so right up in his face. Well, I was thinking I need to get as strong as I can in just 4 days, so, would you mind sparring with me? Spar with you? She asked with a curious glance. Yeah, see, I need experience on how to fight against much stronger opponents, so sparring with you would be the perfect chance. He explained his plan to her. She understood his reasoning quickly with an, oh, good point, and quickly agreed. Thus it was decided. Rimuru would train his hardest with Milim for the next few days while Benimaru organized their forces and put together a proper strategy and the others helped evacuate the city just to be sure. Vesta quickly returned and informed him that Gazel would be honoring his deal and send over a squad of his best knights. With the plan in place, the countdown began to Charybdis' arrival. A loud boom echoed through the nearby forest, though it did not startle the line of citizens evacuating the city. 2 days into the evacuation, the commotion coming from just over the hill had become just background noise. This noise was, of course, the mock battle between Demon Lord Milim and Rimuru, although to an outsider it looked more like Milim was being a bully. It became pretty clear pretty quickly to Rimuru just how outclassed he was in terms of, well, everything against Milim as soon as they started sparring. Even when holding back to what the great sage was claiming to be just 3 times of his own estimated power, her combat prowess was just off the charts. She was faster, stronger and pretty much impossible to outsmart, as far as battle went. He was sure she wasn't using her dragon eyes to tell what he was gonna do, but even so she was never once caught off guard by his tactics, no matter what he did. He wondered if she had just been in so many fights. She had simply seen all the tricks in the book and could instantly tell what would be coming. Even though she was wearing power-nullifying gauntlets, her punches could still topple large trees in one hit and crack a 5-meter-wide boulder into pieces. And she wasn't shy about directing those at him, mock battle or not. He couldn't complain, as he was the one who said not to treat him with kid gloves, but still, one hit and he would fall unconscious, he was sure of it. Fortunately, he was just fast enough to avoid them, if barely, but it was extremely draining. Slimes didn't got tired as a rule, but at the end of each sparring match he felt weak, like when he was almost out of magicules after going on a naming spree. On the other hand, she didn't look like she had spilled a single drop of sweat. As he jumped around, trying desperately to avoid her furious punches, he continuously searched for an opening, a small mistake, anything that could help, but it was a waste. Any openings were so small, he doubted he could move fast enough to exploit, and that was assuming they weren't deliberate on her part to draw him into a trap. He didn't put it past her, she was crafty. When in battle, she really felt like a different person. Focused, decisive and, if he was honest, merciless. The others had joined in at first, but quickly gave up. Benimaru, Shion and Soi had already tasted what she could do once and didn't need much from the second round to leave. They even had Hakuro try his luck. He failed. But Milim seemed genuinely impressed, which must have touched the old ogre because he bowed in honest appreciation. This is a true demon lord, Rimuru though as he watched Hakuro leave. Someone who is just leagues above in power than even those who would otherwise be considered at the top. No wonder she's selfish. I doubt anyone in 1,000 years was ever stupid enough to say no to her requests. Those that make me the ultimate idiot? He didn't want to know. In any case, today's session ended like all the others. Him totally defeated, she not looking a hair out of place. Good grief. Time out. I can't take much more, he said as he tried to not simply melt into a puddle. Ah, but I can still go. You'll never get better if you don't push harder, you know, she said with a pout. No, I can't get better if I die of exhaustion, he wanted to tell her but decided against it. He doubted she would listen. Whatever. I do have a few good ideas on how to deal with Charybdis, depending on what it does. Tria had helpfully filled him in on Charybdis' known powers. By far the most dangerous one was its magic interference, which caused magic in its general vicinity to be extremely unreliable. Purely magical attacks would be diminished next to nothing, so direct physical attacks were required. Problem was, as Tria explained, Charybdis was huge, easily 100 meters long and covered in extremely those scales. Using his fights against Milim as a benchmark, he had honed some of his skills into being more effective. Great Sage had honed his skills into being more effective. He seriously hoped it would be enough. Speaking of Milim. I have lunch from Shuna, he informed the pouting Dragonoid. She tried to resist the temptation for a few seconds, but when food what involved her willpower took a nosedive. And so they went about eating lunch under the shade of a nearby large tree. As she happily ate at her sandwiches, Milim looked over at him with a curious expression. Say, you still sure you don't want me to take care of things? She asked nonchalantly. She did that every time after their battles, no doubt hoping to get a different answer. He had already committed to the though act, so he refused. The answer is still no, Milim. She just pretended to not hear him and to not have asked in the first place, munching away. Before she got too carried away again, he decided to be a little more straight with her. Listen, I wish I could just let it up to you, but I can't. This is the responsibility I accepted for myself, so I have to see it through, he said as he began scratching the back of his head, not making eye contact. He could feel her eyes staring at him inquisitively. After a few more seconds, he heard her speak. Aren't friends supposed to help each other, though? She asked with genuine curiosity, making him turn around in her direction, locking eyes with her. Were they always that blue? He wondered as he stared at her. For her part, Milim seemed confused at why he was staring, tilting her head ever so slightly. It was enough to make him turn away before he had another weirdo about her, but it was too late. She's really something, having this effect on me just from that. He pondered her words and decided that he should really stop taking her for granted. She was completely and utterly sincere when she said that she really did consider him a close friend, maybe the closest she had. Yeah, they do, he told her, just not this right now, okay? He turned around, so don't worry, I got this, and gave her the best smile he could muster. For some reason, it was her turn to quickly turn away. He was confused as to why. Was that red he saw on her ears? He dismissed it, though. No point in letting the imagination run wild during an emergency. Unknown to Rimuru, Milim was having a panic attack. When the boy, Slime, flashed that smile at her, she could feel her heart stop for a second. If she was human, though it would have caused her to die or something, so good thing she was a demon lord. Then she felt a strange heat rising up to her cheeks and ears, and an urge to turn away from him. So she did, faster than she launched her punches in their mock battle earlier. Wah! What is this? She had trouble with thinking straight. It's like that feeling I had the first time I came here, but much, much worse. Was it that? I never felt that feeling before, so. Is it something else? She, being a millennia-old demon lord, of course knew the basics of relations, but aside from that she never really cared to learn more. Now though, she regretted it. She wondered who she could ask for advice on the issue. Someone who wouldn't laugh at her. Maybe Shuna? She seems really okay. I don't think she'd laugh. But she's Rimuru's subordinate. Would she help me? Why is this happening now? What do I do? Oblivious of Milim's internal struggle, Rimuru began eating himself. After a while, the girl excused herself, saying she has something to do, and left. Something to do? Wonder what she's up to. Well, as long as it doesn't cause grief to me, and continued eating. There were only 2 more days until Charybdis would arrive. He could feel the eerie aura coming ever closer, even at this distance. He needed to be prepared, so he pushed aside all other thoughts but his plans against the beast.
He would win, he had to, for the sake of his city and all of his people's efforts. He did, however, keep one other though, that once it was over, he would try his best to be the friend Milim believed him to be. Any notion of pretend and convenience, he decided to throw it away, maybe it would finally solve that weird feeling he had around her all the time.
The day had arrived. Charybdis was here. Rimuru and his top subordinates were lined up on one of the roads leading out of Tempest and into the forests. They were as ready as they could be. The main plan Benimaru came up with was to intercept the creature in the open space the road provided so that even their ground forces had a clear line of sight of it. Gabaru and the dwarven Pegasus Knights would distract it in the air while the rest would draw in the 13 megalodons accompanying it and take them out first so they could then focus all they had on the main threat. He felt sorry for Geld and the high orcs who toiled for months to pave the road, but it was better it be destroyed than the city. Most citizens had been evacuated into the nearby hills and were ready to leave even further at a moment's notice. He watched the massive creature loom in the horizon, and he really did feel like just giving up and begging Milim to do all the work. Speaking of Milim, she had, despite his reluctant insistence, came along onto the battlefield. He tried to protest again, but she spoke up first. "Ah, don't be like that," she said with a hint of anger. "I'm just here for convenience sake." She smiled as posed haughtily. Convenience?" he asked her, genuinely confused. "Yeah, it'd be a hassle to come find me when you'll need me to step in, right? Oh, and I expect sorry, with that, please, okay," she said as she ignored his befuddled look and moved to sit crossed-legged under a tree, bringing out something from her storage space. "Are those chips?" Indeed, they were chips. He decided to forget about the girl for now before he popped a vein in Annoyance. Slimes didn't have veins, but he sure felt like he did, and decided to focus on the battle ahead. Charybdis was now almost on top of them. With a sign from Benimaru, the battle commenced. A hell flare shot up into the air, its black flame visible from miles. A megalodon was caught in the blast and died instantly, falling to the ground. The rest of the troops surged forth to deal with all the smaller enemies while Charybdis was distracted by the flying troops. The distraction didn't last long, but it was enough. His subordinates made surprisingly short work of the flying sharks, dispatching them one after the other. In short order, the last megalodon was fell, but as they all feared, this was only the start of their struggle. The large beast made a deafening, ungodly screech before a cloud of smaller object began to fly off of it and headed straight for them at great speed. A quick glance told Rimuru they were the creature's scales. He decided this was his moment to shine. He flew and put himself between his assembled troops and the incoming projectiles, ignoring the protests of Soy and Xian to get back. Now he was ready. He was, mostly, sure of it. "Ever since I had predated the Orc Lord, my skills improved greatly. Slowly but surely, they evolved. With the extra experience I got from my battles with Milim, that evolution was now completed, right? Notice. By absorbing and assimilating skills starved, your skill predator has evolved." Great Sage informed him, gluttony, and with that one command all the incoming scales were gone, engulfed by a black cloud that devoured them in seconds before drawing back into his outstretched arm. Silently, he wondered just how shocked his allies must have been. He quickly flew over to Charybdis and tried to consume the beast too, but it was no use. Like Predator, Gluttony could not devour enemies with equal or greater magicule content. However, he noticed that he did, in fact, caused some damage to the creature, as it began thrashing and focused its entire attention on him. A beam of energy shot out of its one eye, but he avoided it easily. Now that he had its undivided attention, he gave his troops the order to attack. He would keep it at bay while they would dwindle away at its health, slowly but surely. Though he started this day dejected, he now felt more confident that they could actually do this. However, nothing ever goes perfect. While they were doing damage, it was too little to really count. It was adding up, but very slowly. Moreover, the damn thing could grow back its scales due to its high-speed regeneration, launching volleys at his allies sporadically, forcing him to stay on the defensive more than the defensive. Thus the battle dragged on. It dragged on for 10 hours. By the 10th hour of the battle, he was really starting to panic again. He calculated, Great Sage calculated, that at their current rate, it would take up to 2 more days to finish it off. He realized they would not last that long. They had set up a system in place before the battle began to allow troops to rotate around and rest, but that could only do so much. Worse, he suspected and Great Sage confirmed that the creature showed signs it would evolve soon. It wasn't too surprising. Monsters evolved all the time as they got stronger, but this could not have come at a worse time for them. Then, a gargle of barely discernible noises came from the creature. How dare you? Am I? Lim, is what it sounded to Rimuru. What? Did that thing just speak? Confirmed. Its exact words were, "How dare you, Milim?" Great Sage helpfully confirmed, but he was still confused. How is this thing talking? What the hell did Milim had to do with it? Was my gut instinct to let her deal with this right in the first place? Damn you, Shuna and Xian. He wanted to shout at the two ogres, possibly scold them, but for now decided to go and see what Milim had to say. She was sleeping. She was sound asleep under the same tree he left her under, looking completely unperturbed by their massive battle nearby. He was partially annoyed at her for that, but also could hardly blame her. She offered her help, free of charge, and they completely cut her off. He decided against shaking her awake violently and tried to do so gently. Milim. Hey, Milim, wake up. The sleeping girl suddenly jolted awake, looking confused at where she was before she remembered. Ah, no, I wasn't sleeping, she immediately protested. I was cheering you on, with my eyes closed. Yeah? Rimuru was not buying it, but he though better to just get to the issue. Yeah, listen. The big tuna seems to have busyness with you, not me. Hearing that, Milim stood up quickly and glanced over at Charybdis. Ah, really? A moment later, her eyes seemed to glow, a sign he learned meant she was using her dragon eye ability. Oh, that guy is inside Charybdis, she reported. That guy? Rimuru asked. Ah, that beast guy who came to Tempest, Fabio or whatever, she tried to explain. Rimuru racked his brain to think. Fabio? He realized, he's inside that thing? Yeah, by the looks of it he's being used as its core. Milim helpfully explained to him. So does that mean Charybdis was following his desires? To get revenge on Milim for getting his ass beat. What a pain, he though as he looked over the creature, then over at an eager-looking Milim. Ah, she's rearing to go. Well, I ain't standing in her way 1 second longer. Okay, it's your turn. Just let me get everyone out of the way. Alright, I'll get it distracted. And flew off at high speed. Sure enough, Charybdis was on her tail, everyone else forgotten. Attention everyone, this is Rimuru. For your own safety, please retreat away from Charybdis. We're gonna try something, and you don't wanna be near it. His telepathic message rang through the minds of everyone assembled. As quick as they could, they began a hasty retreat and were clear within a few minutes. Evacuation completed, Milim, he said as he quickly flew over at her side whence he put some distance between Herzer LF and the monster. You can go ahead and do whatever, however. I was wondering if you could do something for me. What is it? Would you be able to destroy Charybdis but spare Fabio? I'd rather not have the hassle of having a demon lord's underling's death to deal with. Hey, easily, I don't know why worry so much, but since you asked I'll do it. Now sit back and see how much restraint I can show. Restraint? I have a bad feeling about that. He thought as he watched she turned to face the great sky monster head-on. What is she going to do? Charybdis unleashed another wave of projectiles in the air, all of them headed for Milim. He quickly flew backwards to avoid them, but she didn't even flinch, just smirked and outstretched one hand, palm forward. At that simple action, every single projectile simply stopped dead in the air, their inertia completely killed off. What was all his dumbfounded mind could think up at the sight? With another simple downward motion, Milim dropped them all onto the ground. Then she put her hands together in front of her. A wave of energy seemed to wash from the space between her hands, a brilliant white light emanating from them. Warning. Indescribable. Collection of information failed. Wait. Even Great Sage can't tell what that is. Dragon Buster. Milim's voice rang out over the forests. At least 24 beams of light shot out from her hands, moving at high speeds towards the beast. The beams twisted and turned and made contact with it from several different angles. The effect was instantaneous. A massive explosion replaced Charybdis in the sky, creating a shockwave that could be heard for tens of miles and completely eradicating the monster. An expanding cloud was all that remained. What about any of that was restrained? He wanted to shout, equally parts awed and terrified at the ridiculous display of power. However, his view was directed at something falling out from the cloud and plummeting quickly to the ground. He realized that she had, in fact, spared Phobio, despite catching him in that insane explosion. How she did that, he had no clue, nor did Great Sage. He grew wings again and raced to catch the falling beast man before he died, then lowered him down onto a flat patch of land, kneeling to check if he was breathing. Milim also quickly flew down to where he was, flashing a smile and a victory sign. Watching her, he had to admit to himself, she was incredible. He could not even imagine the level of skill required to pull what she did, so he didn't bother. Instead he looked up at her, awed, and was really glad she was on his side.